He sat quietly on a park bench, watching the world go by. His clothes were ragged, and his face, worn by time and hardship, looked older than it should have. The world around him seemed to move fast, with people walking past, absorbed in their own lives. Nobody paid him any attention, and that was just how he liked it. He didn't want their pity or their looks. The man had been living on the streets for as long as he could remember. His life was a cycle of finding a spot to rest, waiting for food, and avoiding trouble. But even in his worn state, there was something about him that was different from most others on the streets. His eyes weren't full of anger or bitterness, there was a quiet kindness there. It was hard to see at first, but if you looked closely, you'd notice it. He didn't ask for anything, not even for a smile. The park was his refuge, the only place that gave him a little peace. He would spend most of the day sitting there, watching the people walk by. Some of them were in a hurry, others stopped to sit on benches just like he did. He would sometimes wonder what their lives were like if they ever noticed him, but it didn't matter. He had his own world to live in. The park was his, and it was enough. That day, though, something was different. He could feel it in the air. It was a late afternoon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun began to set. The park was still busy, with families, joggers, and people finishing their workday strolls. But then, through the crowd, he saw her. A little girl, no older than 6, wandered into the park, her small frame lost in the sea of adults. She was alone. Her face was pale, and her eyes darted around nervously as she took a few hesitant steps forward, clearly searching for something, or someone. Her small hands clutched a stuffed bear tightly to her chest, and her clothes, though clean, didn't look quite right for the season. She seemed out of place, like she didn't belong here. The man watched her for a moment, a pang of concern spreading through him. It wasn't unusual for children to run ahead of their parents in a crowded park, but there was something about the way she moved, something uncertain in her steps, that made him feel uneasy. The people around her kept walking, absorbed in their own lives, none of them noticing the lost child. His heart began to race as he saw her take another step, looking even more lost than before. He couldn't just sit there. Slowly, he stood up, his body creaking with effort, and made his way toward her. She was just a child, and no one else seemed to care. He wasn't sure what he could do, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't leave her alone. As he approached the girl, his heart thudded in his chest. He wasn't sure what he could do, but he couldn't just let her wander around, lost and scared. The little girl looked up at him as he stopped in front of her, her wide eyes filled with confusion. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at him, unsure of whether to trust him. "Hey there," the man said gently, crouching down so he wasn't towering over her. "Are you okay?" The girl hesitated, then shook her head. "I can't find my mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was looking for her, but I can't find her anywhere." The man's heart sank. He could see the fear in her eyes, the tears threatening to spill over. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and placed it on her shoulder in a comforting gesture. "Don't worry, I'll help you find her," he said, his voice soft but steady. She nodded, but her small face still looked so lost. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. How could he, of all people, help her? He had nothing to offer, no resources, no way to call her parents. But he couldn't leave her here alone. Not like this. "Let's take a seat for a minute, okay?" he said, guiding her to the nearby bench. He sat beside her, careful not to make her feel uncomfortable. She clutched her stuffed bear tightly, still looking around, trying to spot anyone who might be looking for her. "We'll stay right here, and we'll figure this out together," he told her softly, hoping his words would comfort her. Even if he wasn't sure how to fix this. The man sat next to the little girl on the bench, his mind racing. He didn't know where to begin. He couldn't just sit there forever, hoping her parents would magically appear. He had to do something. "All right, sweetie," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We're going to walk around the park and see if anyone knows where your mommy is. Okay?" The girl nodded quietly, clutching her stuffed bear even tighter. Her small hand felt fragile in his, but he held it gently, reassuring her with his grip. They started walking slowly through the park, the man scanning the faces of people who passed by. He stopped a few times, asking strangers if they had seen a little girl with a stuffed bear. Most of them shook their heads, too caught up in their own lives to give it much thought. A couple of people smiled at the girl but didn't seem to take her lost state seriously. The man could feel frustration creeping up on him. How could no one care? How could everyone just walk by? He tightened his grip on the girl's hand, determined not to give up. As they walked further, the park grew quieter, the fading light of day casting long shadows on the ground. The man's heart was heavy with worry. He could see the girl's fear growing as the minutes stretched on. "It's okay," he said, even though he wasn't sure if he believed it. "We're going to find her, don't worry." He tried to keep her distracted, telling her little stories about animals and adventures, but his own mind was consumed with the thought of how much danger she might be in. The light was fading, and the park was becoming emptier by the minute. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep pretending everything was fine. Suddenly, he spotted a couple walking in the distance, scanning the area as they approached. It was them, the girl's parents. The moment the man saw the parents, a wave of relief washed over him. The couple was frantic, their eyes scanning the crowd with desperation. The woman's hand was over her mouth, and the man was looking everywhere, his face twisted in worry. The girl, sensing her parents were near, pulled her hand out of the man's grip and ran toward them. The man's heart caught in his throat as he watched the little girl rush into her mother's arms. The woman bent down, scooping the girl up, her voice trembling with emotion. "Where were you? I've been looking everywhere for you," the woman cried, holding her daughter close. The father, equally shaken, knelt down beside them, his face full of relief. "Thank God you're safe." The little girl clung to them, still a bit shaken but comforted by their presence. "Thank you," the mother said, turning to the man. Her eyes were filled with gratitude. "You found her? You brought her back to us?" The man nodded, a quiet smile pulling at the corners of his lips. "I'm just glad I could help," he said softly. The father pulled out his wallet, offering the man some money, but the homeless man gently shook his head. "No, it's all right," he replied, his voice firm but kind. "I just wanted to make sure she was safe." The mother hugged him tightly, whispering a thank you, and the girl gave him a small, shy hug before they walked away. The man watched them disappear into the distance, a feeling of warmth spreading through him for the first time in a long while. The next day, the man was back in his usual spot on the bench, his old, worn coat pulled tightly around him. The park was quieter in the morning, just a few joggers and people walking their dogs. The sky was gray, the air crisp and cool. It felt like any other day, but something about the way the world seemed to move around him felt different. He couldn't explain it. As he stared off into the distance, lost in his thoughts, a woman approached him. She was dressed professionally, her dark hair pulled back into a neat bun. She had a kind face, but there was an intensity in her eyes. The kind of look that said she had a purpose. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Are you the man who helped the lost child yesterday?" The man looked up at her, surprised. Yes, I helped her," he said, unsure of where this conversation was heading. The woman smiled, taking a step closer. "I've been looking for you. My name is Sarah. I work with a local organization that helps people who are homeless and struggling. We heard about what you did, and we wanted to thank you." The man blinked, his heart beating a little faster. "Thank me? For helping a lost child?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, what you did was incredible, and it didn't go unnoticed. Someone saw you, and they spoke to us about you. You're exactly the kind of person we need." The man was confused. "I don't understand." She smiled again, this time with a warmth that felt almost too good to be true. "We want to offer you a job. We have a position for someone who has been where you are. Someone who can understand and help others who are in need. It's a job helping others, guiding them through difficult situations, just like you did with that little girl." The man's eyes widened in disbelief. "A job? You want to give me a job?" She nodded. "Yes, a steady job, a chance to start over. And with it, we can help you get back on your feet." The man couldn't speak for a moment. He had never imagined something like this could happen to him. A job, a fresh start, it was everything he had stopped hoping for. But now, standing there in front of Sarah, it felt like the possibility was real. The man stood there, his mind spinning. The offer seemed too good to be true, a lifeline he never thought would come. He had spent years drifting from one day to the next, just trying to survive. The idea of a steady job, a chance to help others, was something he could hardly wrap his head around. Sarah noticed his hesitation and stepped closer, her voice softening. "I know it's a lot to take in, but we really believe in second chances. You have a unique perspective, and your experience makes you someone people can trust." The man swallowed hard, his hands feeling clammy. "But I don't have much to offer. I don't know what to do or how to start," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah smiled warmly. "We'll help you every step of the way. It's a position that involves guiding people who are in situations like yours. You'd be working with others who need support, showing them that there's hope, just like you did for that little girl." The man's heart raced as he processed her words. The idea of helping others was something he hadn't even considered. Could he really do it? Was he ready for this? "You'd be paid well enough to get your own place," Sarah continued, "and we'll provide all the training you need. This could be your chance to build a future, a real one." The man closed his eyes for a moment, trying to shake off the disbelief. He had never imagined such a chance would come for him. He had been stuck for so long, living in a world that had forgotten him, but now there was someone who believed in him. He looked up at Sarah, his voice shaky but steady. "I don't know if I deserve this, but I'll try, I'll do my best." Her eyes lit up with a gentle, reassuring smile. "That's all we ask. You've already shown what kind of person you are. Now it's time to show the world." For the first time in years, the man felt something stir inside him, hope. It wasn't just a fleeting thought anymore. It was real. The man's first day on the job felt like stepping into an entirely new world. His hands were shaking as he adjusted his new shirt, which didn't have the frayed sleeves or patches he was used to. He was no longer wearing the worn-out shoes that had carried him from one street corner to another. He had been given everything he needed: a uniform, a small office space, even a proper lunch. As he entered the building, a feeling of nervousness crept up inside him. It had been so long since he had been part of anything structured. The rhythm of work, the conversations, the expectations, it was all new to him. But there was something different this time. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged. The team he worked with was understanding and patient. They didn't treat him like someone who had failed or fallen behind. Instead, they saw him as someone with potential, someone who could help others who were struggling, just like he once had. He spent the first few weeks learning, listening to others, and slowly finding his place. It was hard at first. There were days when he felt like an imposter, unsure if he was doing the right thing, or if he could really make a difference. But with each passing day, he grew more confident. He learned how to listen to people, how to guide them through their struggles, just as he had once been helped by someone. The change wasn't immediate. It was small, gradual steps. But soon enough, he started to feel a shift inside of him. His old habits faded away. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was building something. He was helping others, and in doing so, he was finally helping himself. When he finally moved into a small apartment, a place to call his own, it felt like a victory. It wasn't just the four walls or the bed to sleep in, it was the promise of a future he had nearly forgotten was possible. Months passed, and the man's transformation was undeniable. The man who had once been a shadow in the park, unnoticed and forgotten, was now someone entirely different. He had a routine. He woke up in the morning with a purpose. He dressed in clean clothes, his hands steady as he adjusted his tie, and for the first time in a long time, he looked forward to the day ahead. His job was no longer just a way to survive. It had become his calling. Every day, he worked with others who were struggling, offering the same care and understanding that had been given to him when he was at his lowest. He listened, he guided, and he helped people find hope, just like he had once found in the kindness of a stranger. People in the community started to recognize him, not as the homeless man from the park, but as someone who was making a difference. His smile, once rare and hard to find, became more frequent. And with each person he helped, he felt more at peace with himself. He had a small apartment now, a space that was his own. He decorated it simply, but it was filled with a warmth he had never known before. One evening, as he walked through the park where it all began, he paused. The familiar sounds of children laughing, couples chatting, and dogs barking filled the air. He stood there for a moment, a smile spreading across his face, and for the first time, he truly believed that life could be better. He had found his place in the world, and he wasn't going anywhere.